Okay, here, ladies and gentlemen, l'chaim, first of all, we'll make a blessing on our cup of juice, soda, coffee, or water. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol niyah bidvaro. Okay, we are into a new topic. I wouldn't say new, the whole Tanya is connected, but we are continuing, segueing into a conversation that has been building up. People in our class, students have been asking this question, when are we going to get to it? And here we are, finally have arrived. So until now, chapter 35 through chapter 37, the big conversation, if you were to sum up the previous few chapters, 3 chapters especially, 35, 36, 37, if you were to sum it up in one word, it would be action. That's what we have been discussing, the primacy, the importance, the action base of our mitzvahs as making a home for God. We explain why action is so important. And just as a little heads up, today's class is not going to be so much inside, bifnim. It's not going to be so much in the text. We're going to be covering the overview of the chapter, and it's actually going to be the overview of the next few chapters, 38, 39, and 40 are one chunk, one idea. So I'm going to be giving you an overview. So whether you're listening to this class live or as a recording, it's just to give us a heads up of the next few chapters. A lot of it is going to be theoretical in the text. So I thought it would be good to first give an overview of it, so to see how this chapter gets in and what it's about. So the reason why we have been talking about action is, as the Alter Rebbe in his own word says, is because it's to give a comfort to the Beinoni. His main work is behavioral. And therefore, the comfort is, you should know that the behavior, the action, is actually the most important thing. So you have the most important task to do. Even the tzaddik has to do your task. But really, nothing is black and white. Everything has two sides. So while we have been talking about the importance of action, many of you have asked, what about kavanah? What about meditation? What about intention behind the action? So that's where we're going to see the flip side to this conversation. Until now, we've been discussing the importance of action. Now we're going to see the contrast, the importance of the kavanah, the intention behind it. We can't forget that there's something else called kavanah. It's to counterbalance the action. Meaning it's not just the action, which is just doing the right thing. There's also the intention, meaning the right thing. So that's what 38 to 40 is going to be about. So before we get into that, the Alter Rebbe first, he opens up the chapter reiterating the importance of action, and then saying, but you should know there's also the importance of kavanah. So he reiterates how action is crucial. And even our mitzvahs that are not done with our hands or our feet, but mitzvahs that are done with our mouth verbally, like saying the Shema or blessings, which, by the way, blessings are a rabbinical mitzvah. It's actually not biblical. Anyone know, if I were to test you, what's the biblical, the mitzvah that is the blessing that is biblically mandated? There's only one.
Shema.
Actually, interesting. I guess I would say that, but that's not counted as a blessing. That's counted as a prayer. Okay. But the only blessing, like with saying Baruch, the only blessing is actually the grace after meals. The blessing after we eat, that's actually biblically mandated from the Torah portion of Akev, where it says, V'achalta, v'savata, uveirachta, that you shall eat, be satiated, and you shall bless God, meaning thank God for the meal. The blessings that we say before eating, the blessings we say before doing a mitzvah, like lighting candles or putting up a mezuzah or any mitzvah, those are all rabbinically mandated to do a blessing. But regardless of, like Nancy saying the Shema, which is a verbal prayer, or saying a blessing, which is a rabbinical mitzvah, all of that, we need to use we need to move our lips to get the action, the organs moving, because the action is so important. So the Alter Rebbe is going to reiterate that in order that even a mitzvah, a verbal mitzvah, should have a grounding in physical. And even when we meditate in our prayer, it doesn't count until we actually verbalize the prayer. So you can meditate on the greatness of God and thank God in your mind and your heart, but that doesn't count until you actually verbalize it. So without the physical component, there is no mitzvah. But then the crux of this chapter is going to tell us that the Alter Rebbe teaches us that a mitzvah without intention, the Alter Rebbe is going to use these words, is like a body without a soul. You can have a body, but it's lacking the soul. What is it worth if it doesn't have the soul? Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine you are like me, that you're a connoisseur of wine. Well, I try to convince myself I am, at least, because my grandfather is from France, but also a connoisseur of coffee. I love coffee. It's been a couple of years since I was at Starbucks, actually, because of COVID. I just haven't had meetings at Starbucks or many coffee shops recently, but I brew my coffee. And on Shabbos, where I can't brew because we don't use our electric machines, I have an instant coffee with a plug-in from a hot, we say in Yiddish, maybe it's Russian, I don't know, a chainik. In English is an urn where we have our hot water set before Shabbos, and I just make an instant coffee. It doesn't taste the same. So imagine you have a guy who's a connoisseur of coffee. He knows his coffee, he loves his coffee, but one day he comes down in his pajamas to the kitchen, and lo and behold, there's no more K-cups. There's no more coffee cups. He can't have his brewed coffee. He just can't start his day. He's miserable. It started off on the wrong foot. He's not ready to tackle the day, and he's depressed. So his wife sees him sad, and she asks him, what's wrong? And he explains to her, I didn't have my morning coffee. And she really feels for her husband. They've been married for 30 years. She knows how much he loves his coffee. She loves the coffee too. So she could commiserate with him. They sit on the couch and they go, ay vavai, ay gewalt. She reminisces the good old days when they had this delicious coffee, when they were in Hawaii and they had the Hawaiian flavor coffee. They're able to reminisce all the good coffee days. And the daughter, who's a teenager, she doesn't drink coffee. She comes down, she comes down the stairs and she sees them both sad, crying on the couch, and asks them, what's wrong? And they explain, we don't have coffee today. So she says, oh, wow. And she leaves the house, comes back 5 minutes later with Starbucks coffee, with delicious coffee. So 2 piping hot cups of coffee arrive on the coffee table. In this case, who is the tzaddik and who is the Beinoni? Let's pretend that the coffee lover is God. It actually says, Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. God never sleeps. He neither slumbers nor sleeps. He has a lot of coffee. So the husband in this case is God. He loves his coffee. And the wife and the daughter are 2 ways to respond to God. God has a desire to do a mitzvah. His desire, the husband's desire for coffee, is like God's desire for a mitzvah. The wife and the daughter are 2 ways of the Jew responding to that desire of God. So just to refresh our memories from many, many, many chapters ago, chapter 12, we know that how does a Beinoni connect with God? It's through action. He can have these deep emotions. It's just not something he could trigger from inside of him, or a deep meditation of the mind, of Chachma, Bina, and Das. What he could do is behavior. He could control himself. He could connect with God through his behavior, thoughts, speech, and action. So the tzaddik, obviously he could do action also, but what is his exclusive connection with God, like exclusively his emotions? That belongs to the tzaddik. His emotions are perfect. So the tzaddik is connecting to God emotionally. The Beinoni is connecting to God behaviorally. So the daughter, she can't connect to her father about coffee emotionally. She can't commiserate with her husband, with her father, that he lacks his coffee because she doesn't appreciate what coffee is about. She just doesn't get it. So the daughter is like the Beinoni, who doesn't understand why Hashem loves these mitzvahs. The Beinoni can't connect with God emotionally on understanding the importance of the mitzvahs, the desire that he has. But the Beinoni could acknowledge that Hashem likes it. And therefore, that's enough for the Beinoni to want to do it. So the Beinoni gets it done. doesn't understand the depth of the desire of the mitzvah, but the Beinoni could understand that God wants it, and therefore I'll do it. The wife, on the other hand, actually commiserates. The wife appreciates the taste of coffee. Emotionally, the tzaddik connects with God about the desire of God wanting the mitzvah to be done. I don't know if it's helpful. Maybe I'll just make myself a little bigger there, if that's helpful for anyone. So the wife is like the tzaddik, which, by the way, for the record, every wife is a tzaddik. We'll just put it out right there. So, but in our analogy here, the wife is like the tzaddik who understands and appreciates the desire to do the mitzvah. The tzaddik is revolted by a sin, and anything that opposes a mitzvah, the tzaddik opposes. So, of course, the tzaddik also fulfills the action, but even until the action is done, the desire part of it, the tzaddik gets. But here's the beauty of the story, that until the coffee is brought, all the commiseration of the wife to the husband, it doesn't give him coffee. He's not going to start his day. So she could appreciate the desire, but having that tzaddik-like emotion of connecting with God emotionally is not going to get any job done. So at the end of the day, who's actually connected on a deeper level to the man? The daughter is, because she brought the coffee. Because while the wife is commiserating, the husband is actually missing out on his coffee. She could have gone to the store and get him coffee. Maybe, I don't know why he couldn't go. Maybe he can't drive. But instead of her going out, she's commiserating, which is being a good wife. But really, she could have got some coffee. But the daughter did it. So that's what this chapter is going to be about, where you see the importance of the action that the daughter is doing. But when you focus on that, comes along chapter 38 and says you can forget about a very important part of the story, which is the meditation. There is an importance to understanding the desire of God and commiserating and appreciating the depth of what it's about. So these chapters that we're about to learn are rather technical and abstract. It talks about God's desire in different worlds. And the height that our mitzvah could reach through its performance with a meditation. Usually Tanya is more practical. These couple of chapters are a little more technical. All right. So just continuing along. Any questions before I continue? Oh, I see two little things come up. Okay. Borei nefashot al michya and birchat hamazon. You got it. And some people may just go through the motions of the do mitzvah, but the mitzvah is biblically mandated. Isn't it more important to do the mitzvah even if your heart may not be into it? Of course, break it until you make it. And then work through towards something absolutely if you don't feel things first. So of course, for sure, the action is the most important. Like the example we've been giving in the past of a person who meditates about charity didn't do anything until you actually give the charity, even if you didn't really want to give it. The mitzvah is done. The mitzvah is done. If a person even drops a 20 out of their wallet and a poor person finds it and is able to feed their family dinner, you fulfilled the mitzvah of charity, even though you didn't even have any idea of it. So the action is the most important. But we all know that the highest level of giving charity is, or I wouldn't say the highest, but a very high level of giving charity is when you give it with a smile, even if it's not a big quantity, but when it's done with joy and the poor person, the recipient feels it, the whole mitzvah is done differently. Whereas if you give even a higher amount, but you give it disgruntled, you give it with a sour face, it's a lower level of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not performed as high as it should have been, because the smile changes the entire joy in it, the enhancement of your feeling in it makes all the difference. That's really what the chapter is going to be about, the importance of the meditation behind the mitzvah. All right, we're going to put a parenthetical part over here about an important section of the Torah that many of us have been appreciating from Nancy, her weekly incredible masterpiece of Torah thoughts, of Dvar Torah of the week. So this is going back to June, where we had the story of Korach. Korach was actually a cousin of Moshe. I'm not going to go through the entire details, but Korach led a rebellion together with many other Jews. It was 250 that were on his side and many others that kind of got swept up in it. But they ended up getting swallowed in the earth, the first earthquake of the history. Their rebellion was, why should Moshe and Aaron be the top? Why are they the princes, the leaders? I also want to be a prince. I want to be the leader. We should all be leaders. It's actually a very virtuous complaint. He wanted everyone to be at the top. But specifically, the story came immediately following another story, the story of the spies. So just to make sure we're not getting too overwhelmed with some Torah explanations here, there's two very famous stories in the Torah that follow consecutively one after the other. The first is the story of the spies, where the Jews, the spies went to Israel, came back and scouted the land, and came back to the Jews and says, we want no part of this land. Immediately following that, literally a few weeks after, came the story of Korach, the rebellion Korach led. So why did he wait up until this point? Aaron has been a high priest, a Kohen Gadol, for over a year. Moshe has been the leader for even going back to Egypt a couple of years. So what took him so long to object until after the story of the spies? He specifically only Korach protested Moshe's leadership and Aaron's priesthood only after the story of the spies. Why? So the Rebbe explains like as follows. The spies, when they led a rebellion by going to Israel, scouting the land, coming back to the Jews and saying, we don't want any part of this land, and they all fell for it, they were actually frightened from the mitzvot that we will have to be performing in Israel. It will all be action-based. In the desert, they barely had any mitzvahs to keep, any. It was all meditation. Moshe was the lead meditator, and they were all following his lead and meditating and spiritually connecting with God. They were frightened to live a more physical style life with practical performance of mitzvahs in Israel, agricultural laws, all those laws. They were choosing to live a more spiritual life in the desert, and they were worried that their spiritual life will be jeopardized going into Israel and having to fulfill action-based mitzvahs. So the Rebbe points out a specific word that they say kulam anashim. The spy says they were all men, which we learn from there that the woman had no part in this evil plot, and therefore the women weren't punished. Right? We all know that the woman actually went into the land of Israel. All the men, not only the spies, the 10 spies, but all the men fell for it. And that's why the men of that generation died, did not go into Israel, because God said, you don't want it. I'll give it to your children who want it. The woman wanted it. So the women went into Israel. The older women, they went into Israel. Number one. Number two, also just another parentheses within the parentheses, that that's why women don't have the obligation to be part of a minyan. Of course, they could come and pray, but the obligation to count 10 men in a minyan is really just that tikkun is rectifying the mistake that our ancestors made of 10 men getting together and coming up with an evil plot of not going into Israel. So since then, we have the tikkun, we have the rectification to fix that by 10 men getting together and doing something holy, a davar shebekdusha, making kedusha happen, making kaddish happen, which all is the word kadosh or kedusha, kaddish, all mean holy. We have the obligation to fix it until Mashiach comes and rectify it by getting together for positive things. So anyway, that's a side thing. That's not the point over here. But the Torah emphasizes that kulam anashim, that they were all men. But the Torah already said their names, and we already know they were men because the Torah says their names. It was so-and-so, ben so-and-so. So it doesn't say bat, it doesn't say the daughter of. We know that they were the son of so-and-so. We know they were men. So the Alter Rebbe explains that in general, this is a blanket statement, and I'm putting it in my words, men are more theoretical and abstract. I'll explain to you what I mean by that. But men like discussing ideas. Whether the job gets done or not, let's talk about an idea. And I could tell you this firsthand. I study Talmud a lot. Talmud is all about ideas. It's all theory. Many parts of the Talmud never happen, but it's just discussing it. And sometimes I come home and Adina asks me what I learned, especially by the first year after we got married. I spent a lot of time studying, advancing our study to a different degree before expenses pile up with children and family. But the first year we were like, it was more simple living in Brooklyn. And I would come home after a day's study, and my wife made yummy dinner, and we would sit together, just the two of us, before all the noise and kids came along. And she would ask me, so tell me, my dear husband, what did you learn? And I started going off on some explanation of an ox who gores a sheep and this whole thing. And she was like, and then like, and she's like, so what's the law? I was like, oh, I have no idea. I'll just tell you what the commentaries say. And she was like, what do you, like, what's the point? What are you learning? It was all just abstract ideas, which are important. It's Torah, of course. But you know the story of the rabbi who in his speech, he's talking about the importance, his sermon on Rosh Hashanah is talking about the importance of educating our children, putting your children through a Jewish education, having patience and not spending too much time in the office, but coming home to help your children and guide them and mentor them. And then it was Yisker, which we say on the high holidays, on Yom Kippur, and the rabbi goes out and he sees all the children playing, and they just repaved their parking lot, so the cement was still soft or still wet, and he sees the children making Magen Davids in there and doing all these fun things that kids like doing in cement, and he starts yelling at them, "You good for nothing, you mazik, you troublemakers!" And the Rebbitzin goes to the rabbi and says, "You were just talking about having patience and being all kind with our children." And the rabbi says, that was just in the abstract, not in the concrete. So the point of the idea is that in general, kulam anashim means the men of that time, it was more theoretical. They wanted to enjoy just the ideas behind the mitzvahs, the conversation that we have about doing the mitzvahs. Women, on the other hand, are very practical. It's like the bottom line. We want a menorah lighting. I'm talking about let's do this and let's do that. But the bottom line, how is it going to get done? It happens through my wife. Adina is like the backbone behind all of it to get done. So the men were choosing to preserve Torah by keeping it abstract. Let's not apply it to day-to-day life. Let's keep it as an idea. But they were greatly mistaken. So once that story of the spies happened, that's what emboldened Korach. Korach, who was the aftermath of the story. Why did he wait until after the story of the spies? Because once he saw their mistake, that they wanted to keep things abstract. And God says, no, that's wrong. It has to be practical. It's day-to-day performance of mitzvahs. That's when he understood, until this point, let me start from this way. Until this point, Korach understood that it makes sense that Moshe is our leader because spiritually he's gifted with a higher level of foresight, a higher level of understanding, a deeper level of wisdom. Aaron is given a deeper level of love in his heart. So therefore it makes sense that they are our leaders. From cognition to emotion, he could understand that they could feel more about God. They could understand depth of God. Therefore, they lead us because they could connect on a different level. But once the story of the spies happened, and they tried to advance this idea that Judaism should remain theoretical, and they were refuted by God and says, no, that's not what Judaism is about. Korach had an aha moment. Korach said, if it's not just about the theory, if it's not about just how deep we could connect with God spiritually, but it's about the action of our mitzvahs, on an action level, I could do tefillin just like Moshe could. My wife could light Shabbos candles just like Aaron's wife could. Just some trivia. Does anyone know what Aaron's wife's name was? Yaakov, you would know this, no? If I'm not mistaken.
Was it Yaakov?
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 I don't think so. I think her name.
That's Moses' mother.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, very good. Yocheved, right? That's Moses' mother. If I'm not mistaken, her name was Elisheva.
Oh, yeah, Elisheva, yeah.
So anyway, but the point is that on an action level, we could fulfill the mitzvahs just like them. just like a tzaddik. So what Korach was saying is, why are they at the top? If the whole purpose is the action, the practical mitzvahs, I could do that just as good. Why are they the leaders then? That's what Korach's rebellion was based on. So it's specifically as the aftermath to the spies. That's what the Rebbe explains. But he was wrong, right? Korach had a strong case, but it was wrong. He got swallowed up. He's right that action is important and primary, but he discounted the value of the kavanah, the intention. So the spies went to one extreme that it's just about kavanah. Korach went to the other extreme that it should be just about the action. But we have to find that perfect middle ground, the importance of both. You can't have one without the other. That's the point of chapter 38. So now, once we understand that, the importance of intention in here, and we see it based on from the Torah directly, now we can understand how intention comes into the picture. It's not just saying that until now it's action, and now we're showing you the other flip side of the coin, like I said before, and the other hand, which is intention. All this is still going to be part of the Beinani's comfort. That action is important because it's fulfilling Hashem's desire to have a home in this world. But if you truly want to have a lit up home, an illuminated place for God, then you need the emotion, you need the meditation. Because without the emotion, our meditation, our kavanah, intention in the mitzvah, the degree of Hashem's presence in the world is diminished. It's building a home, but keeping the lights off, the outdoor lights, the indoor lights, so no one is appreciating the home. You're doing the home, you're doing the action, you're building the home, you're doing the mitzvahs, but you're keeping the lights off and dim, and therefore you can't truly appreciate it. It's not lit up. The kavanah is lighting up the home. The kavanah is lighting up the mitzvah. So emotions behind the actions enhance the degree in which Hashem has a home. So just to be very clear, action creates the home for God. So if you were to choose one or the other, you got to choose the action. That's how you make a home for God. But don't think action alone will do the whole job, because it will make a home, but it won't be an ambiance of a home. You won't enjoy it. The intention creates the joyful home that we want for God. It makes a brighter dwelling place. So if you take, for example, just to give you, put in perspective, if you have a Hanukkah party, a night out, you're renting out a restaurant, or you're renting out the room in the back of the restaurant, and it's a massive celebration. You're celebrating the end of COVID, family from far away is all together. The waiter greets them with a big smile, and he's flipping his pad on his finger. He's able to do all these fancy things, and it definitely adds to the ambiance that the family is having on their party. He's charming, he's charismatic, and he's full of jokes. Finally, the order comes, and he mixes it all up. Not only is he mixing up who got what, which is always impressive when a waiter gets it right and knows exactly where to put what. Not only is he mixing that up, but he got the order wrong. I wanted medium done, and you gave me a rare steak or whatever it is. You got the order wrong. Then you could have another waiter, a different party, that's robotic. No charm, no smile, no tricks. But he got the job done. He got the orders right. He put it in the right place, and he said, "You're welcome," or he said, "Thank you." Which waiter would you prefer at your party? I need some feedback here. I see all of you moving your lips, but someone answer.
Personally, I would prefer the robot who got it right.
Well, anyone would disagree?
I always prefer somebody who is kind and who said, you know what, I made a mistake. Let me fix it now. I didn't mean any harm, something like that. So that I like dealing with people who are kind and intelligent. And if they're not so intelligent, at least that they are still trying to do the right thing.
So first guy or second guy, the charismatic, charming waiter that makes mistakes, or the robot waiter that got it right?
So that's the charismatic, because you said smiling, joyful, trying to do the right thing. But, we all come at things from different levels of sophistication, or education, or intellect, or whatever. So he didn't know that the fork needed to go on the right side versus the, the left fork on the left. You know what I'm saying?
Ron,
But when brought to his attention, then he corrects the thing. So
Ron, would you agree to Nancy or to Robin? Ron would go to the first waiter. Really? So you would agree to Nancy, the charismatic, mistake-making waiter. I guess, Ron, you're hoping that he's going to credit you and not charge you for the dinner, right? He's going to put it on the house.
It would make me happier.
Really?
It made me happier, better mood.
Even though, so I need my food. And if he got my food wrong and my
Yeah,
steak
goes
rare
back
instead of
now.
done,
The right thing comes back. You shuffle it around. What's the difference in food?
wow, okay.
I
Okay.
would rather have my soup without a fly, than have so give me the robot waiter.
Let's talk about the tips we leave.
Yeah, exactly. So that's funny because I thought, explaining the story, that it would be a no-brainer that everyone's going to choose number 2. I'd rather a robot but get my food than an actor, but I don't get my food. So it's very interesting to hear the other perspective from a few of you, that you would prefer the smile and bad food. So that's good. So but just for the sake of this chapter, I will have to say that the chapter is going along the path that you would prefer the action guy, the guy that gets it done, get the job done. But if, of course, in the ideal world, if you were only able to choose one, you choose the second type of waiter because you get the job done, you get your food. But if the ideal is you choose the second waiter that with a smile, you get the job done, but do it right.
Right. What I was going to say was you have the robotic guy, and then there's a mitzvah to make his day. Maybe he had a horrible day or something, and just to find out how he's doing. And I always like it when I can switch it around and they have a smile after I've been able to talk to them. That's a win for me.
Very nice.
Plus, you're spending all this money to go out with your family,
Right.
to spend time with your family. So the first waiter is just distracting from that. I went out for dinner with my family, not dinner and a show.
All right, so isn't the point that God has a prescription for how we're supposed to behave? This is why you're saying that the more important thing is to do it God's way rather than the way that we think is fun or sweet or charming.
So I guess the nimshal, the analogy that I'm bringing is for the outcome over here is that the service of the waiter, the getting the job done, that's making the home for God. The smile is the emotion that we do the mitzvah with that enhances the goal, but the home for God is the ultimate. When we feel it more, it illuminates the home better. So chapter 38, here's the punchline: mitzvah without a kavana, the service without a smile on the waiter, it's like a body without a soul. Of course, you would choose the action if you were to choose one or the other, but the goal of chapter 38 is saying it's not one or the other. It's got to be done together. You have to have the action, but you got to do it with joy. You have to do it with the emotions. You have to do it with the kavanah, or the intention. I'm going to be using those words a lot as we read it inside.
Rabbi, can I say one more thing? I was talking about, the charming guy, but I was thinking of maybe somebody who's nice, but is not, doesn't do a good job. But when advised about what the good job is, then they go and they do it. I mean, I understand when I go out to a meal with my family, I don't want to be served the wrong food, but I see it as it's a combination.
Well said. Yeah, good point. So chapter 38 is saying that we need that combination, and that the integrity, the importance of kavanah, how important it is. So we have 4 levels here. We're gonna hold on. That there, perfect. Okay, I think we should start inside. I have a little more, but I could save on that for later. We're buckle your seatbelts. We're gonna have a lot to learn. So, all right, I will pull my screen up for the Kindle edition. And chapter 38, what page are we on in chapter 38?
We're on page 431.
Perfect.
Who call him in truth.
Here we go. So I didn't share the screen yet. Hold on one second.
Just
Here we go. The power of kavanah, intention. Section 1, proof that the soul doesn't need fixing. So in case you missed a few of the most recent classes, have no fear. He's going to give you a summary before we start chapter 38 inside of what we have been discussing in the previous 3 chapters. So it may be repeated because I already gave you a little bit of a review, the importance of action, but let's see it inside where he gives you a little more color. In chapters 35 to 37, the Tanya has been offering us some comfort over our spiritual predicament. Most of us will struggle to battle in vain with the impulse to evil, unable to prevail over it, because we are destined to carry out the most important of tasks. What is it? To bring divine revelation, Shekhinah, to the animal soul, body, and physical world, the spiritually darkest of places. For this goal, which is nothing less than the purpose of creation, the practical mitzvahs are most effective since they engage the body and animal soul to the greatest extent. In chapter 37, we learned that even mitzvahs performed through speech, such as Torah study and prayer, could be considered practical mitzvahs, which engage the body and animal soul, right? Remember, how do we explain the verbal mitzvahs and blessings? How is that counted as a practical mitzvah? Because moving the lips constitutes a concrete action. But according to this logic, the mitzvahs performed through speech appear to have something of a confused identity. If you remember a few weeks ago, we were talking about this verbal mitzvah, how it works. Their practical component, moving the lips, elevate the animal soul and body, fulfilling the purpose of creation. Whereas their mental and emotional component, understanding the Torah, connecting to God in prayer, does not, right? It doesn't elevate the animal soul. In the following passage, the Tanya suggests that this somewhat bizarre conclusion is clearly supported by a point of Jewish law. Now, following everything that has been written above in chapter 37, we can further appreciate the ruling of Jewish law as prescribed in the Talmud and halachic codes. That meditation does not count as recitation. If I were to meditate on a prayer, it doesn't count. It has to be verbally said. Which means that if you read the Shema only in your thoughts and didn't articulate the words with your mouth, even though you did so with all your powers of concentration, nevertheless, you did not fulfill the basic requirement of the commandment to read the Shema. And you have to go back and read it again, enunciating the words. The same law applies to Birchas Hamazon, which is the grace after meals, which, as I mentioned to you before, is a biblical requirement, and with other blessings that are rabbinic law, which similarly must be verbalized in order to fulfill the mitzvah. So we see clearly that a mitzvah, a blessing, a prayer needs to be verbalized in order for it to count. If it's not, it has to be repeated again. And the same is the case with prayer, which must be verbalized even though prayer is primarily the service of the heart. Evidently, thought alone without speech is not an acceptable form of worship in Jewish law. So we see that clearly in law, that thought doesn't count. Thought doesn't lead, it could lead to something, but on its own, it's not valid. It has to have the speech in order for it to count as a prayer or a blessing or a study, etc. Now we turn to the reverse case, where the words were recited, but the thought was lacking. What happens if the Shema is recited, but you were thinking about a ball game, you were thinking about the stock market, but if you articulated the words of the Shema or prayer, etc., though you were not attentive to what you were saying, you did fulfill the basic requirements of the mitzvahs after the fact, which is in Hebrew, it's b'diavad, and you don't need to go back and repeat the Jewish law. Jewish law will often express a preferable standard of observance, which is lechatchila, which means the ideal way to do it, and a minimally acceptable, which is b'diavad standard, which should not be aimed for, but is legally acceptable once you have already done it. In this case, mindless words of Shema and prayer, though obviously not ideal, are considered acceptable after the fact. So I think we all go through this. I was just watching, I watch a weekly video of the Rebbe. It's called Living Torah. It's put out by GEM, which is Jewish Educational Media. They do incredible weekly messages from the Rebbe, and they don't just give you a talk of the Rebbe, like a 10-minute talk. They first give you an overview based on people's interviews of encounters that they had with the Rebbe about this theme. So a few weeks ago, it was about, and Barbara's not on the call today, but I sent it to her husband, Howard, who's always involved in how to focus better in prayer. And if anyone wants, you could just email me, and I'll be happy to share with you as well. You may need a login you may need a login. I pay $5 a month for the subscription. I would be happy to share my login with you, so that you can watch it. It's people that were coming to the Rebbe and complaining that they're not concentrating in prayer. One of them said that I find myself in a synagogue in New York, but really I'm in China thinking about the sales of my clothing that I have my business in my shmata business in China. So they came to the Rebbe for advice, and you see the different advice that the Rebbe gave them of how to be able to concentrate better. Like to one person, I found this to be so practical. He said, when you're praying, you should actually point to the place. The words, eventually, when you repeat the words day in, day out, it becomes so easy to say that you know it by heart. So that's how your mind can wander. What the Rebbe was saying is point to the place where you're reading it inside, so you don't lose your focus. You stay connected. I found that to be a very practical advice. And if anyone, anyway, you can watch the video. It's maybe a 15-minute clip, but they do this weekly. It's really cool. They do a weekly clip of the Rebbe on different topics. So just now was about Hanukkah. For those that were at our Hanukkah party, I showed the most recent clip, which was about the lights of Hanukkah to always grow. It was also a very powerful message from the Rebbe. But I guess I'm getting a little sidetracked. So just to point back over here is there's lechatchila and b'diavad. Lechatchila means the ideal, original way of how we should do a mitzvah, a law. And then there's b'diavad, which means if it was done this way, which is not the ideal, it still counts. So if a person says the Shema without concentrating, they say the words, because we know by heart anyway, but they didn't concentrate. So for most of the Shema, you actually fulfill, there's a few paragraphs of the Shema, you actually fulfill your mitzvah, even if you didn't have the full intention. But B'diavad, it counts. But l'chatchila, it has to be done with the right intention. But what we see from there is, as long as the words were recited, it's good enough. It's not the best. Whereas if you just had the thought, the intention, without reciting the words, it doesn't count at all. So we see the primacy of the importance of action or verbalizing with your lips to get it done. By the way, I just, I would say that maybe I'll look at the words better in the Tanya, but if I'm not mistaken, the first line of the Shema, which is the 6 words, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, you do need to have intention by those words, that God is one in the world, and that God is one in my life, and that God is our King. If you don't have that intention, I don't think you're fulfilling it. You have to actually have the intention. You can't be thinking about football during that word. Let's just see that again. If you articulated the words of the Shema, it doesn't contrast the first line or the second, so I'm not sure. But let's continue anyway. Obviously, we're on the bottom paragraph of the Kindle. And Robin, what page are we in the book?
It's 433. I'm not Robin, but it's 433.
433, right.
All right, so obviously God can stipulate how he wishes to be worshipped. And he could require worship through thought, speech, or action. God could have just dictated how he wants it done. That in itself does not pose a problem. What is confusing here is why in the mitzvahs of prayer, Shema, and Torah study, the two components of thought and speech are bound by diametrically opposed laws. The speech is crucial and the thought is dispensable. You would think Torah study, what's the most important part of Torah study? Is my mind. Why are we saying that the mind part is dispensable, whereas the speech action part is the primary, when really the whole point of prayer is in the heart? So the Tanya's concern here is why in the context of a single mitzvah does speech become prioritized and thought marginalized? So before answering the question, the Tanya first notes an exception to the rule. I wasn't sure if he was going to get to this. This is what I was telling you before. I just didn't see it on the page we were up to. Except for the first verse of Shema and the first blessing of the Amida prayer, which according to Talmudic law do need to be repeated if you were not attentive to what you were saying. As the Talmud states in the second chapter of Tractate Brachot, after about reading the Shema, that up to this point, the mitzvah involves correct intention, meaning after the first line. From this point onward, meaning after the word echad, after the first 6 words of the Shema, the mitzvah is simply one of reading the words aloud. So, like as I mentioned before, that the kavanah needs to be there in order to fulfill the mitzvah in the first line of the Shema. After that, it's ideal, but as long as you got the speech out, it counts b'diavad. Having noted this exception, the Tanya now proceeds to explain this legal status of speech thought mitzvahs based on what we learned in the previous chapter. The reason for the legal emphasis on speech. So the question we have on the table is, if Torah study and prayer, the main part of that is in the heart and in the mind, you would think that the intention is the most important. Yet intention is marginalized, which means that if you didn't do it with the intention, you still fulfill it. And the action, the speech, the verbalization of it is primary, that if you didn't do the prayer with the lips moving, you didn't fulfill it. So why would Hashem make it that way? And the answer is because the main part of the mitzvah is to elevate the animal soul, not the godly soul. The godly soul doesn't need fixing. So that's what he's going to say now. The reason for the legal emphasis on speech and the emphasis on thought is because the soul itself does not require fixing at all. And you can look in the previous chapter. Through mitzvahs, rather, the purpose of mitzvah observance is to pull down God's light in order to fix the energizing animal soul and the body. And therefore, it's crucial that the mitzvah involves the animal soul and body through actual words spoken by the soul, using the 5 organs of speech, which are the throat, lips, palate, tongue, and teeth. So when you use your 5 organs of your mouth, which is of the speech, throat, lips, palate, tongue, and teeth, that's when you are elevating the animal soul, the energy of the animal soul, and doing the mitzvah properly. And the same is true with the practical commandments which the animal soul performs through the body's other limbs. As we learned in chapter 37, even the mitzvahs of saying the Shema, praying and studying Torah, are primarily aimed at elevating your body. And that's why Jewish law stipulates bodily involvement, moving the lips, as an indispensable component. On the other hand, the more spiritual, mental, emotional components of the mitzvah are not legally crucial. Since the soul does not require fixing at all, they are not the reason why you are here as a soul in a body. I'm just going to take some of the questions I see coming up, some privately. So Lynn is quoting, let's just go back to a little higher. Can you please type in the 2 ways to perform the mitzvah, the Hebrew terms, please? All right, I could do that. Kavanah is the, oops, let me respell that. This is just someone who actually asked me to type it. Kavanah is the intention. That's, oh, I'm not writing that to everyone. Sorry, hold on, everyone. Here we go. Let's do that again. Kavanah means intention. I'm just putting that in the chat for those that asked. And maaseh is the action. Maaseh means action. Machshava, dibur, maaseh. Thought, speech, and action. So that's the maaseh part. And then quoting a beautiful chapter, chapter 19, let the words of my mouth, and we actually say this, it's a beautiful verse, Lynn. We actually say this 3 times a day in the Amida. The last line of the Amida, after all the 18 blessings in the Amida, the last line of the Amida, we say that line. So even young children know it by heart. It's Hashem tsuri v'go'ali. So that verse from Tehillim we say very often to remind ourselves of the importance of having the meditation of the heart at the forefront. Thinking about the action of tzitzit and how you will not follow after your heart and mind. Straight. Well said. Okay, let's continue inside. We could squeeze in maybe another section. Section 2, mitzvah and kavana, body and soul. So this is what I was telling you before about the body without a soul comparison as the intention, the mitzvah without the intention. This concludes our lengthy discussion, beginning back in chapter 35, about the virtue of practical mitzvahs and their power to elevate the body and animal soul. In the following sections, until chapter 40, the Tanya will address the other side of the coin and highlight the great virtue of attuning the mind and heart to a mitzvah, right? That having the kavanah fully present. As we shall see, the emphasis on the practical component of the mitzvahs ought not to undermine in any way the value we attach to a mitzvah's mental, emotional components, which are also a requirement of Jewish law. And it's only that after the fact, the lack of attentiveness doesn't legally disqualify a mitzvah. So just to explain that paragraph, the kavanah needs to be there. It's just that if you didn't do it with the right kavanah, you still fulfill the mitzvah of prayer, except for the first line of the Shema. But ideally, the chatchila in Jewish law, you have to have the kavanah present. Nevertheless, all the above emphasis on the practical component of a mitzvah doesn't mean that attentiveness is unimportant, for it has been said, prayer or other blessings without attentiveness, kavanah, are like a body without a soul. The phrase "a body without a soul" seems at first glance to suggest lifelessness and death. But to say that a mitzvah without kavanah is dead and meaningless would contradict our entire discussion above, that even in the absence of attentiveness, there is great validity and significance to a mitzvah. So I'll be honest, when I at the beginning of today's class, when I said that a mitzvah without kavanah is like a body without a soul, some of you, your eyebrows lifted up because were raised, because a body without a soul is lifeless. Are you saying my mitzvah is lifeless and it's almost dead if it's not done with the right kavanah? So the Alter Rebbe is going to address that, even though he's saying it's a body without a soul. We're going to bring that up a little more. The Tanya therefore offers a different interpretation, which meaning what does it mean, a body without a soul, as the mitzvah without kavanah? It means just as all the created beings in this world have a body and a soul, each having their own separate sources of life, energy from God, so too the practical deed of a mitzvah and its kavanah each have their own life energy. However, the life energy of the body, which is the practical deed, is far less than the life energy of the soul. So that's a pretty cool thing, to think that our soul has an energy, a life energy that's for the soul, and the body also has its own life energy. Which one is obviously more significant? Obviously the soul's energy, whereas the body's energy, which is the practical deed, has a less life energy. The phrase "like a body without a soul" doesn't mean to say that the body, which is deed, is dead and lifeless. It means that only the body's own minimal life energy is present, as opposed to the abundance of life energy found in the soul. Right? We all know when a person is full of energy, it's not that their body is high on caffeine. A person is full of energy is that their soul is full of life. It's more the soul. The energy of the soul is much more impactful than the energy of the body. So when we say that a mitzvah without a soul, the mitzvah without kavanah is like a body without a soul, we're saying that the only energy you have at that point is the energy which comes from a body, which is from the actual deed, which is a lot less significant than the energy that comes from kavanah, which is the energy coming from a soul, which is a lot higher, a lot stronger. To clarify this point, the Tanya will first illustrate how both the soul and body have their own separate source of life in God. So it's getting a little bit more technical now, but what we're trying to prove is that the body has its own life energy, the soul has its own life energy. And when we say the mitzvah without kavanah is like a body without a soul, we're not saying it's dead and lifeless. We're just saying that the energy around that mitzvah is a lot less than the energy done with kavanah, because it's coming from a soul energy. First, we will demonstrate that the soul at all three levels of nephesh, ruach, and neshama is alive. So now we're going to give some scriptural citations. For the soul is the nephesh of every living thing and the ruach of every individual being. That's from Job. And the neshama of everything. So just if you're following in these words, we just quoted a source that the soul has a nephesh part to it. It has a ruach part to it. And it has a neshama part of it. Even though in general, the soul is called a neshama, which is a soul, a breath, but there's a certain level of the soul that also is the level of neshama. There's a certain level of the soul, nephesh, ruach, and then a third is neshama. And that's from a quote in Genesis at the beginning of the Torah where it says, everything that has a spirit of life in its nostrils, which include all the animals. But this doesn't mean to say that the body is devoid of its own life force from God, separate from the souls, as we will discuss at length in the second book of Tanya. God brings all physical matter into existence continually, which means that there is a constant energetic life force being pumped by God into all physical matter, regardless of the presence of any soul. In fact, even a rock must have its own divine energy, otherwise it wouldn't continue to exist. So just to summarize that point, you may have heard it before if you've been around any Chabad rabbi. It's one of the tenets of fundamentals of Chabad Hasidus. It's the source of it is in the second section of Tanya. So the first section that we are learning since I think November of 2019 or 2018, who's counting? But God willing, we'll in good health, we'll be studying it for many more years. It's 53 chapters. We're up to chapter 38, so we're making good progress. But that's the first section of the Tanya. It's about the Beinoni. It's called the Book of the Beinoni, about our struggles and our triumphs and our control and our souls. The second book is about the energy, the life force of God creating the world. How not, and just to explain it in a few lines, the way God creates the world is constant. God spoke words, let there be light, let there be the sky, let there be animals, let there be birds, let there be humanity. 10 utterances, God said. And by God saying those 10 utterances, those letters in which God created the world, Yehi Or, that Yud, Hey, and Yud, and Aleph, Vav, and Resh for Or, that's making the light an existence in the world. And through combinations of all those 120 letters used in those 10 utterances, every single creation from a rock, which is inanimate, it has a life force from God. It has an energy. So animals, kosher animals and non-kosher animals, people, Jewish and non-Jewish, water and minerals and everything else, all has an energy of God creating it. It's a life energy. Obviously, the level of life in a rock is different than the level of life in an animal or a plant or a person. So their life energy is different. That life energy is nephesh, which is giving it life. It's a life energy. The stone, if you were to crack it open and look deep with a magnifying glass, you would see on a spiritual level, you would see the life energy giving it life. In fact, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, towards the end of his life, like literally the last day or two, he was, I wouldn't say delirious because you don't say that about a Rebbe, but his mind was he was seeing things that no one else was able to see. He pointed to the beams of his home, of the bed that he was lying on, and he says, what do you see? And they said, we see a beam. And they said, I don't see a beam, I see the godly life energy giving it life. He was able to tap into the source behind it. So what we're going to be saying over here, let's just go back in for a moment and we'll wrap up the class with this. What we're saying over here is that everything has the life energy, the body of the life energy, and then it has the deeper energy. It's like the body and the soul. The soul energy is obviously a lot stronger, but there's the body energy in there also that's continually giving it existence. So stones and dirt are all there. We're just going to try to finish this section. So we are, and God gives life to them all by the middle of the page, both body and soul and spirit of life and matter and spirit. And he brings them into being continually something from nothing through his light and energy, which he pours into them. Since even the physical body and even completely motionless stones and dirt contain light and energy from God, otherwise they would return to be null and void as they once were. Even stones and dirt are alive in the sense that God's life energy must constantly be pumped into them to maintain their existence. They always have that energy of God. And if stones and dirt have their own life force, then certainly the physical body does too, independent of the soul. And that's really the point, that the body has its own life energy. Nevertheless, if I were to ask you what's a higher source of energy of life, is it the soul or the body? You would obviously answer the soul has a higher level of energy. There is simply no similarity or comparison at all between the divine light and energy, which shines in the body, to the light and energy, which shines in the soul. Since the soul is overtly alive, it's the life of every living thing. So the statement that a mitzvah without attentiveness, I like that word for kavanah, it's not intention. He's translating it as attentiveness, like focus, is like a body without a soul. Means not that the mitzvah is dead or invalid, but that it's low in life energy like the body and not high in life energy like the soul. So that's a beautiful way of understanding when the title at the top of this Tanya, at the top of this chapter was a body without a soul, a body without a mitzvah without kavanah is like a body without a soul. He's saying it doesn't mean it's dead and lifeless, like a body without a soul. It just means that it's coming with the energy. The performance of the mitzvah without kavanah is only tapping into the energy of a body, which is a lot less of a degree of life, godly energy than that in a soul. And with that, we will conclude with today's class. For those that have the time to stay on, I'm just going to answer a question that's coming up. Can a non-Jew have? Oh, there's some so there's two parts to this question. One is, could it have a godly energy? And the answer is, of course, right? Because everyone has that godly energy, and the different level of kingdom, from mineral and inanimate to vegetable and animal and then human, the level of the godly energy is a lot stronger. That's even why, when people ask me, their dog dies, do they go to heaven? There is some source of doggy heaven. While it's not, there's no gate with big dogs in the front, and there's no guards with dogs that are guards opening the gates for them. But there is that godly energy that the animal has that's now going back to its source when the animal dies. So there is that godly energy, and human has that. The Jews have that, and non-Jews have that. But if you're asking, and the question that came in is specifically, could a non-Jew have a Jewish soul? The simple answer is no. They have a non-Jewish soul, that energy. But probing a little deeper, there are non-Jews that have Jewish souls, and that's why they are inspired to convert. Because deep down they have that spark that has been triggered and is waiting to be expressed. So it's like a Jewish soul in a non-Jewish body that then they convert, so that Jewish soul is able to be fully expressed. So I hope that answers your question. Yes, Lynn, I'm sorry for.
Yes, well, so I have a thought going through my mind, and you can correct it if it's.
Yeah, and I'm just going to pause the